Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today's video, I wanted to talk about split pushing in League of Legends, as it's been sort of a subject of contention and sort of a subject of thought experiments by a lot of players, given that Riot have recently given us a few more details about their new split pushing item that they are talking about putting into the game in order to sort of fill a niche as something that is needed, and with Yorick being sort of turbo buffed on the most recent patch and just being a really powerful champion, I feel, in general, but also having this sort of split pushing bonuses going on for him as well, is sort of a subject of a lot of people talking about split pushing in general. Some people really hate it, some people really love it, and a lot of people either don't know how to do it or don't really know what it entails or why it's even a strategy in the game. So I did feel like it would be a good idea to sort of talk in general about split pushing today and sort of close out with my thoughts on what this new split pushing item might look like, as we have a few templates to choose from that have existed previously in League of Legends. First of all, what is split pushing? Because a lot of people think that just walking into a side lane by yourself means you are now split pushing, which is not really the case. Split pushing is a distinct strategy that involves sending a single champion to a side lane to push enemy towers while the rest of the team gathers as four in order to threaten an objective or otherwise push a separate lane. The idea here, of course, is that if you are the singular champion, that you're powerful enough that the enemy team can't just send one champion to deal with you, that you will either be able to outplay or outduel, or just in general, the only thing keeping you away from the tower is the threat of multiple champions, because you can kill the tower out from under an enemy champion if they're all on their own. And so in that regard, you necessitate the enemy team sending multiple members to deal with you, but that then means that they are now at a 3v4 disadvantage in whatever other lane you're at, or that you're essentially getting the best of both worlds, right? If you have a Malphite split pushing in the bottom lane and the rest of his team has grouped up around Baron, the enemy team has a choice. Do we group as 5 and try to team fight them at Baron to prevent them from getting that objective, or do we go stop the Malphite to prevent him from getting the tower? Even if the enemy team is able to make one of those two things happen, the idea is that your team is still able to win on the backside and get something else as a result. So it's sort of pans out for you no matter what happens, and obviously it gets even better if you are playing someone with teleport, as you can sort of have your cake and eat it too. You have the advantage of putting up side lane pressure by pressuring a tower, but if the enemy team do decide we're going to group up as 5 to try and force a team fight at Baron, to use the previous example, you can always teleport in to create that 5v5 scenario regardless, and you force the enemy team into a potentially rash or hasty decision otherwise. It's essentially a way of generating macro pressure on the map in a very simple to understand format, but one that I see a lot of players do wrong. Like I've said, a lot of split pushing revolves around not just walking into a side lane. It doesn't make any sense if you're a champion to just kind of walk in there and say, oh, I'm split pushing, because it requires a lot of team coordination and communication to pull off correctly. A lot of split pushing comes down to being in position to threaten a tower or to threaten an objective as your team is also pressuring an objective, right? If you know that your top lane set is split pushing an objective, then you want to be grouping up with the rest of the team and pushing forward and telling the enemy team, hey, look at us, we're being a distraction right now. Either that, or being the set and pushing up and saying, hey, look, enemy team, my team is doing Baron, but I'm being a distraction right now. In general, to try and draw the team one way or another. If you're all by yourself in a side lane and the rest of your team is in base, well, you're not split pushing then, you're inting, because the entire enemy team is free to collapse on you in the side lane and kill you, because you're not creating pressure. Your team is not going to be able to get anything else on the map. They're all in base right now. So in that regard, that tends to be the most frequent thing I see people get wrong about split pushing, is they just assume if I just walk into a side lane, it works, when it really doesn't. And it's something that you want to be trying to coordinate with the rest of your team and say, you know, hey, I will be split pushing, and then waiting for them to get into position before you're able to get there, and that sort of a thing. Now, generally, a split pusher is going to be a strong fighter or assassin who can threaten towers, or who's reliable enough to solo any single champion on the enemy team. So as I said before, it's not just something that just every champion gets to do or even should do. I feel like, for example, taking Ashe as a split pusher is pretty bad, even though she does have some degree of ability to influence the map globally. She's not ideal in regards to the fact that she's not very independent on her own, whereas the champions like Yorick, Fiora, or Nasus are kind of archetypal split pushers because of how powerful they are in a 1v1, and also because of how much tower pressure they can put out. Those champions, it kind of feels like, wow, you know, we walk away from the tower for 30 seconds and it's already dead from full, because those champs do a ton of damage to towers. You can also, though, totally make champions work who are just strong duelists. Talon and Zed, who are pretty good at being able to deal with any other champion in the game, also kind of work for the purposes of a split push strategy. And of course, champions with powerful global abilities like Shen or Gangplank also function because they're able to be strong independent champions who can also influence the map from elsewhere. So all of those are kind of good examples of champions you want to be playing while split pushing. And for those of you who are very upset with me for giving away the secrets of split pushing and explaining it and saying, why are you doing this? Split pushing is so bad. I hate playing against it because it doesn't feel fair that the enemy team can pick Fiora and just kill all of our towers without us being able to respond. Split pushing is a good thing for the game to have in general because it gives players, and teams really, a way to play around enemy team compositions that they just can't beat. For example, if you haven't really drafted a super strong team fighting composition, but the enemy team is something like Rel, Tristana, Malphite, and Orianna, why would you ever team fight that, right? There's no possible way, and there's no possible world in which you are going to be able to successfully win a team fight against that composition. Like, it's just not going to work out, unfortunately. So in that regard, it kind of makes a lot more sense to be able to send your top laner into a side lane to win the split pushing duel and to kind of generate macro pressure in that regard, as opposed to grouping up as 5 and wondering why you're getting wombo comboed to death in every single team fight, right? It is a good way for teams to be able to play around that sort of a strategy and to kind of come up with a different strategy to help win the game. It is something you can even play for in draft, right? If your first couple of picks aren't necessarily good split pushing champions, but then you see the enemy team locking in a team fight composition, it can be very simple to say, okay, cool, we're going to pick a top laner who can split push, we're going to pick up a couple of mages or supports who are really good at delaying the enemy team or forcing them away from objectives, or who are just good at disengage, and then we can kind of win from there. So I do feel like there are a lot of sort of advantages to this sort of play style and a lot of things that you can kind of do. So in general, I do feel like it's a good thing for the game to have in it, regardless of your personal opinions about it. Finally, talking about the news here, which is that Riot are developing a new item to sort of enable split pushing for a wider variety of champions. As I said before, there are sort of a very small subset of champions that are good at it, and there are other champions that can do it but not very well, and the majority of the roster are not champions that you ever really want in a side lane out on their own doing the split pushing thing. Now, Riot have done split pushing items before in order to open it up to a wider variety of champions, and they've had mixed results, shall we say. The previous two examples are items Rot Portal and Banner of Command. They've either been troll picks or game-warpingly strong, depending on the patch that you want to cite. So these items, while they did enable split pushing in some regard, they were either too weak from a mechanical standpoint to have an impact on the game, or they were so overwhelmingly strong that it just didn't matter. Like, you just straight up played, you bought those items on everybody because you were just able to kill towers like nobody's business. The other problem that these items had is that they both allowed for pushing to be done without a champion in the lane, which allowed you to do things like have a 5v5 scenario, right? Be threatening Baron with all 5 members while the enemy bot lane is being pushed for free by your Banner of Command or your Rot Portal. Now, to be fair, Yorick can do this with the Maiden of the Mist, his ultimate, but this is giving up his ultimate in order to do that. He is saying, I will not have an R for this potential scenario because I would much rather have this macro pressure, have this side lane pressure with my ultimate, which is a fair use of an ultimate level ability, right? Like, it wouldn't make any sense if it was a basic ability, but given that it's an ult, it feels pretty acceptable for him to be able to do stuff like that. So in general, if there are going to be other sort of methods of split pushing in the future, I would expect them to be something that the champion will have to actively be in the lane in order to do, and Riot have essentially said as much in their most recent Riot Please, where they kind of said, we want to make sure that no matter what happens, champions will have to be involved in the split pushing strategy. Now, ideally, I would expect something like the old Herald buff. So if you don't remember this, because it was a while ago, the old Rift Herald used to give out a buff to the champion that picked up the icon that essentially gave their champion periodic bonus true damage against towers every couple of seconds while they were in combat. Now, this obviously could then be transitioned into an item form where the champion, they gain generically defensive stats from this item, but then it also gives them that bonus true damage every couple of seconds against a tower. What this means is that essentially any tank can now split push. If I'm playing Maokai, for example, and I built this item, which let's call it Hand of the Herald for ease of description. So if Maokai has built this Hand of the Herald experimental item here, he would be able to walk up to towers, get a bunch of true damage off on it every couple of seconds. It's enough that now split pushing is viable. Maokai will be able to kill this tower at a fairly decent clip, despite having not built any obvious offensive items, but it also means that he still has to be there and that there is still time to respond to it, right? This isn't like he's dropping a Herald in the lane, or it's not like Fiora or Nasus, both of whom can just rip towers apart in minutes. But it does allow him to at least be able to say, hey, enemy team, you will have to deal with me because I am a legitimate tower-pushing threat. Besides that, I would expect some degree of this item to give straight-up tower damage-dealing abilities. Obviously, Riot have done things that have affected exclusively towers before, with things like, let's say, Ohm Wrecker, for example. And Ohm Wrecker was a bit of a weird one because the sort of things it did were not highly ideal. It sort of said, yeah, you can tower dive better now, but also just build armor, and you can tower dive just as efficiently as you could before. You don't need Ohm Wrecker. Whereas, at least in this situation, it is at least developing your tank toward that specific scenario. It'd be good on something like Shen, who already wants to split push. There are a few ways that you could go about an item like this. So in general, that is something I would expect to see from this new prototype item that Riot are developing, but we'll have to see. They've come up with wackier ideas before, but either way, it will involve some degree of champion interaction in the side lane, so would love to see how that works out. And that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Let me know what you thought of any of this down in the comment section below. I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you are vehemently opposed to split pushing in any of its forms. Let me know what you guys think of this video down in the comments, and especially if you, like I said, if you're not a fan. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I'll put a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.